afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Caribbean Talks. This 1-hour online show encourages dialogue and highlights topical issues that are important to people in the Caribbean. We're going to be talking about Caribbean music, we're going to be talking about Caribbean food, lifestyle, health, fashion, all with a Caribbean twist, showing our uniqueness and what it means to live and be in the Caribbean. I am Avenel Romeo Williams, and the pleasure is all mine to take you through today's episode, where we will be talking about climate change and what we are doing about it. Climate change and what it means for a small island developing stage such as ours is an interest of mine. So I am quite excited to talk about today's episode. Caribbean Talks seeks to highlight the interests of Caribbean people by connecting with the diaspora and the wider world through conversations. Allow me to acknowledge our sponsors, Caribbean Insights, an online platform that focuses on Caribbean lifestyle by providing information on current affairs, lifestyle, and political developments across the region. You can visit their website at www.mycaribbeaninsight.com. Our second sponsor, LRT Media and Business Solutions, empowering businesses and improving people's lives by providing transformative services to clients, primarily in the Global South. I am inviting you to join the live stream, share it with your friends and networks all over the Caribbean region. Follow us on Caribbean Insights Facebook page. Like, share, comment, and more importantly, get involved. Viewers, you are encouraged to put your questions and comments in the live, and we will try to address them throughout the show. So, without further delay, I will introduce our first speaker. Our first speaker is Mr. Tyrell Gittens, Climate Trackers Caribbean. Tyrell is a conservationist, an environmentalist, geographer, and journalist from Trinidad and Tobago. Tyrell holds an undergraduate degree in geography and another in environment and natural resource management. He also has an MSc in biodiversity conservation and sustainable development from the University of the West Indies, St. Augustine. Tyrell has been a journalist since the age of 19 and has published articles in a number of local and regional news outlets. He is currently a project coordinator in the Cropper Foundation's Caribbean Environmental News Network and a freelance writer for the UE Today magazine. Tyrell is also a delegate at the upcoming 2022 Montreal Biodiversity Conference, or COP15, and will provide online coverage at the 2022 United Nations Climate Change Conference, COP27, with the Climate Tracker team. Welcome, Tyrell. Let's jump right into it.
Hi, good afternoon, Avenel. Thank you so much for having me this afternoon.
Great. So how are you feeling?
I am feeling good, and I am feeling energized and encouraged that platforms like this incredible show sees the importance of bringing the topic of climate change closer to your audience.
Yeah, absolutely. So what are your thoughts on climate change?
I think climate change is a very serious issue that we need to pay more attention to now, and not in the future tense as it is usually spoken about, in that context of it being something we need to look forward to in the future, because we are dealing with the consequences of climate change now. For example, we are seeing a lot of, intense tropical systems here in the Caribbean, or like in the Pacific, or even like in the Indian Ocean, when tropical cyclones form. Here in Trinidad, we have the saying that God is a Trini, But that's because that's because we lie outside of the hurricane belt where, like, tropical storms develop and so forth. But alarmingly, in the last 5 years, we have had encounters with several storms, like Tropical Storm Brett and Don and even Bonnie recently. So I think in terms of climate change, it's something very serious that we need to start paying attention to. It's not something that's going to happen. It's something that's happening to us.
So true. So yeah, and you're a journalist, so tell us what projects you have been doing currently, on climate change. Tell us what's happening with you.
Yeah, so I've had the honor of being involved with the Climate Tracker Network.
Congratulations.
Who may not know what Climate Tracker is, it's basically like an umbrella organization. It's based around the world. So they focus on training, journalists to write about climate change and raising awareness about the issue of climate change. And part of what they do, is also train journalists to report on the United Nations Climate Change Conference, which occurs every year. So for the past several years, they have been sending reporters to the conference. So this year, I've had the honor of being one of the online reporters. So there are 10 reporters that will be going physically to Egypt to cover the conference, and 10 reporters, covering the conference online. So I'm one of the online reporters, and over the past several weeks, we have had the most dynamic training sessions, learning from journalists all around the world, from all different kind of places, sharing their experience about all the different COP meetings they have covered in the past, and giving us insights on ways to cover the conference properly, accurately, not to get ourselves overwhelmed, because a lot of discussions would be happening at many different levels. But I think most importantly, what they reminded us, especially reporters like myself who come from the global south and small island developing states, to keep these stories that we write rooted in the community, because at the end of the day, we want people in our communities, whether it be in in the Caribbean or the Pacific or in Indonesia, places that are vulnerable to climate change. You want people in the communities to read about it, relate to it, and understand, why this issue is something that's getting so much of focus. So I would say, that's some of the work I've been doing in regards to like writing about climate change. I've also been writing a lot of climate change stories as a result of being involved with Climate Tracker. A few months ago, I had the opportunity of being part of an energy transition journalism fellowship, where they taught us to write about the transition from fossil fuels to renewable energy in the Caribbean, and we produced a few articles as well around that theme.
Just to be invited into the room, I think is big. So I know you're going to do well. I know you're going to do your best. So I look forward to actually hearing about how that went in the future.
Yes, thank you so much.
Yes. So in the Caribbean, what do you think is the biggest issue for us with regard to climate change for us in the Caribbean?
So I think that's an incredible question. And I think, interestingly enough, the biggest issues that we need to focus on here in the Caribbean are going to be the topic of the day at COP27, which starts next week. And that's climate loss and damage, climate adaptation, and climate finance. So loss and damage, I always say the term is a bit, self-explanatory. It's the loss and damage that we will experience because of climate change. So how does climate change affect our day-to-day lives? Some people will lose sources of income, their livelihood. For people who depend on tourism, agriculture, sustainable fisheries, all these things climate change affect. And not only financially, even health-wise, people will, develop health issues. We have climate,
so interconnected.
Everything is interconnected. And adaptation is, how we will learn to live with climate change. As I just say, climate change is something that we are living with. And finance, of course, is, how we are going to finance those adaptation and loss and damage.
Do you think that we are financed sufficiently here in the Caribbean? Do you think that persons can do more, donors can do more from wherever, private, public? You know, what are your comments on climate finance for us in the Caribbean?
I definitely think that some of the global power players could be doing more, and let me explain what I mean by that. So countries like us, typically referred to as global south countries, small islands, we emit very little carbon. Even Trinidad, which is relatively high in comparison to the rest of the Caribbean, because we use so much oil and natural gas. When we put it against countries like the US and countries in Europe and so forth, we produce very little emissions, yet we are the most impacted by climate change. We are the most vulnerable to climate change. So we have this dynamic where we aren't necessarily the aggressors, but we are in the front line of this battle. So I think that it's important for the aggressors, those large countries, those large companies, not only countries, companies that benefit from oil and natural gas, fossil fuels, activities which release a lot of emissions, such as carbon and methane and stuff, into the environment, should have some responsibility and play their part. For example, small island developing states like us, it's very difficult for us to access like climate finance on the global stage. And we even have in past COPs, countries making promises which they did not live up to. By 2020, we were supposed to be having some of the major economies in the world basically funding $100 billion a year of climate finance to global south countries, and that never materialized. So I definitely think more could be done for funding. As I always say, we live in a very vulnerable region. Our economy is still developing. So it's kind of like a juggling act. As I always say, we have to focus on survival, yet, we also have to focus on climate change. But at the same time, we are not necessarily the aggressors of climate change, and the aggressors of climate change aren't necessarily playing their part. So I think the more could be done to improve financing in the Caribbean.
Yeah. You just mentioned some companies there here in Trinidad and Tobago that do contribute a lot to emissions, to carbon emissions. How can the public get them to, do more? Is it just speaking about it? Should we get the government to maybe pass laws? I know we have a green levy, but is that really enough? I know that they do pay something towards, the amount of emissions that they would produce, but is that enough? Can more be done?
Yeah. So a lot of the companies, I wouldn't name names per se, but a lot of the companies, they do have corporate social responsibility projects, and that's all well and fine. They invest in communities and so forth. Some of them invest in science, technology, and the research fields, the STEM fields. All of that is good. But we are currently in a dire state where I think we need to focus our direction on climate mitigation, which is reducing emissions. So as I always say, here in Trinidad and Tobago, we need to have a conversation about oil and natural gas. It isn't only a sustainable, source of energy, it's also not sustainable in terms of being like a reliant form of revenue generation. For example, we see with the Ukraine-Russia war how oil prices have been going up and down. Particular markets have been experiencing shock after shock in relation to the war. So those companies, yes, they could be doing more on the ground level, but I think we also need to start looking away from oil and natural gas. I may not have necessarily called the company name, but you can get an idea of, to what I'm speaking about. So I just think we need to diversify our economy. That's a word that's been thrown around a lot nationally, but we truly need to diversify our economy and wean ourselves off of oil and natural gas. It's just not sustainable. We are using this to produce money, and it's a very money that we'll have to spend to finance loss and damage. So it's like this, it's this cycle. And I'm not saying that's something that could be done today. Maybe leaders of past and present should have started that process much earlier than us, trying to be at this place today. But it is something that still needs to be done, and hopefully, sooner rather than later. As I always say, we won't wake up today and stop using oil and gas. It would still have a function even as we transition to renewable energy, but we need to start doing something today more than paying this, issue lip service.
Yeah. And importantly, you did talk about us diversifying and trying to wean ourselves off oil and gas. I know I am seeing a lot of private entities that promote green technology, especially throughout the Caribbean region. Do you think that we are good at sharing technology from Caribbean, Jamaica, Barbados, all of us here in the region? Do you think we're good at it? Or?
My pause just raised, and the reason why I had that reaction is so one of my earlier climate tracker stories, I had the opportunity to interview Mr. Donald Barlius, and he's a renewable energy expert, and he founded the Southern Caribbean Cable Company. And over the past 20 years, they have been doing feasibility studies on developing this Caribbean network, this open market for renewable energy, whereas they would build a cable throughout the Caribbean. So for example, Guyana has a lot of hydropower potential in terms of generating energy from their waterfalls and so forth. So we could actually, through that cable, use some of Guyana's energy, or maybe Suriname, and then we have islands with a lot of volcanic activity, occurring more north in the Caribbean islands, such as Dominica and so forth. So they could, tap into their geothermal energy. And the thing about the Caribbean is so unique. We have solar power. We could have solar power. We could have geothermal energy. We could have hydropower. We could have ocean energy, like from the Atlantic Ocean. We could generate energy, wind energy. So we have so much potential. And the thing is, we have people actually, doing research on how this could become a reality. This possibility could become a reality. So when you ask that question, I don't think we are doing enough right now, because, we have the geographic barriers in terms of the islands are disconnected and so forth. We don't really have a market for energy right now. But if, for example, investors invest in a plan like that, where a company actually wants to build a regional network, I think those are things that we need to take, very seriously, because here we are, always talking about what could be the solution, and the thing is, we have people who are actually trying to, work towards a solution. So when I was saying earlier on, for us to diversify our economy, it is estimated we spend at least $6 billion a year on just food imports. And the cable that I've been talking, that I just explained, the company estimate that it could cost about $1 billion US just between Trinidad and Guyana. So imagine if I'm not an economist, I'm not claiming to be an economist. I know how, all the technical, economics and stuff work like that, and maths, and I'm sure it have brilliant people who could also help with that aspect, because this is teamwork, climate change is teamwork. But I sure if we could diversify our economy, cut down our food import bills, I sure we could move our own funds and start investing in projects like this to make that talk of diversifying the economy or energy use into reality. We need to realize these things are realistic.
Yeah, they are, and we are directly affected by them.
Yeah, we on the front lines, and we don't have time. We don't have time to waste. We really don't have time to waste.
Your existence, or our existence, that is on the line.
So many people, I think, would be like, okay, why climate change? Because we live in a world right now with a cost of living crisis and so forth. But if we have no will, we wouldn't even have a cost of living crisis.
Good point.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah, but you really spoke a lot about the private sector. So compared to the public sector, it seems that, can I say that the private sector is really on the ball more so than, governments, individual governments? The private sector has really taken this climate change issue and run with it in so many different ways, so many different avenues. Can we say that?
Um, So I would definitely say that as I said a short while ago, everybody needs to work together for climate change. And while, the government could be doing more to push Trinidad and Tobago along that path, they have been doing some stuff which they could be given some credit for. For example, we may have seen the development of the solar-powered CNG station in Couva. Last year, I know they would have launched, for now it's voluntary, platform where companies could report their carbon emissions for the year, and that could kind of help track carbon emissions. I know there's an electric vehicle policy in the works. We have seen things like the LED bulbs. But to me, more could always be done. And as I just told you, more investment could be done. So it's very encouraging that private companies are, taking up the mandate. But support as well is needed. I know Mr. Balio Singh would have said that TTX, what the company, has indicated support for the project, but there's always room for more. I may not know all the projects that are going on, but there is definitely room for more action, and definitely more room for our leaders to understand the need to diversify away from oil and natural gas. If there's anything that I would say our leaders need to focus more is having a serious discussion on that, and having the political will to make that transition, because it's being done in other Caribbean islands. For example, Barbados, they use solar power widely across the island, and there are actually like schemes in place where people would produce solar power in their homes, and the government would buy the excess from the grid and so forth. So it's being done right in our backyard. So it's time for us to, start thinking about these things and investing more. I think like having tax-free allowance, people being able to purchase electric vehicles and stuff with some tax exemptions and stuff is great. But, we are moving slow. We need to be moving quick, because climate change isn't waiting for us.
All right, I want to move away from the technical bits before we close and pull out the environmentalist in you. I want to ask, is there a particular project, that you may have covered that really touched you, that was really impactful on your journey, your personal climate change journey?
I wouldn't necessarily say it's one project, but I would say it's a multitude of projects being done by a lot of NGOs, particularly in Trinidad. You would have asked about the private sector and what they are doing, but I must give credit to the NGOs, and it's not just because I've been active volunteer in Trinidad and Tobago, but a lot of environmental NGOs are doing a lot of environmental work. For example, we have Nature, which is based in Tobago, and they are doing a lot of campaigns on poaching, illegal hunting, and wildlife protection and so forth like that. We have I Am Movement. They do a lot of environmental work in terms of, rehabilitating quarries and helping people. They have this vetiver grass project, which they plant along river.
The next speaker, I'll have him speak a little more on that.
Yes. And then we have the groups like Climate Tracker, and so we have a lot of groups like yours that are doing these webinars, to help inform people. So I think, and Mr. Balio Singh would have also founded the CZIT. I think it's the Carbon Zero Initiative of Trinidad and Tobago, and they do a lot of tree planting. For example, the moringa tree absorbs carbon emissions, if I am correct, 20 times more another trees. So they actually have a project where they're encouraging groups and communities to plant moringa trees. So I think being able, and I've done a lot of stories on the work that NGOs are doing. Kudos to all the NGO groups in Trinidad and Tobago who are really doing their best to help people on the grassroots level. They are doing a lot of work, and you would have asked about the government and private sector. I would say confidently that NGOs are also carrying, a lot of the work that we need to be done, and investing more in the work that they are doing is something that
really good to hear.
governments and private
really
companies should look into.
Yeah, and on that note, so with all of the help that we have been getting on climate change from all the different sectors, someone just asked that, is Trinidad and Tobago prepared for the shocks of climate change? Are we doing what needs to be done to get us there, or are we on the way to being prepared, in your humble opinion?
Oh, wow. In my humble opinion, I'm a pretty hopeful person, but I would use this example, right? We have seen the recent weather with, different tropical waves we have had in the last several weeks. And just the level of flooding we have, experienced. Now, flooding is something natural. As a geographer, flooding is natural. It has been here before us and probably after us. But that is where things like climate adaptation comes in. So if we know that certain communities are vulnerable to flooding, we should be sitting down and trying to discuss, okay, how could we help those those communities? Is it that we do more river dredgings? Is it that we widen rivers? Is it that we build proper drainage? Because, as a journalist, I've worked as a journalist, like on the ground reporting, and I've covered flooding in communities. And when you look at it, it's simply sometimes a issue of just drainage, like it don't have proper drains, and that's why floods are happening so quickly. So if something as simple as flooding is happening, and then we may have light weather events and the electricity across the entire country is knocked out, and we are not even talking about hurricanes. So if this is just a tropical wave, what will happen when a hurricane comes? So as much as I'd like to be hopeful, I would say we need to be doing more on our disaster preparedness in general here in Trinidad and Tobago.
Very important.
To be taken a little more seriously. Yes, our authorities, again, they do a good job, like the ODPM and so forth, in regards to responding to disasters, but it's more what could we do before, probably evacuating people, beefing up resources, so for when it comes to dealing with extreme weather events, I don't think we are prepared. We have a lot of people living along coastal communities, and if you take a drive to the north coast here in Trinidad, you would see just the extent of coastal erosion. I know there is some rehabilitation work being done on the southern coast to build seawalls and stuff like that. So we need to be seeing more of that to really be able to adapt to climate change, which is, again, climate adaptation, another major topic that they will be talking about at COP.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. But Tyrell, I want to say thank you so much. You gave us so much information to think about and even encourage us to get involved more so than we are now. There are a lot of unsung heroes that you would have mentioned in the NGO space working tirelessly on climate change. I do hope that your stories that you write inspire not only those in this region, but also abroad. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for bringing to light some of these issues. Your words are very, very encouraging.
Thank you so much, and all the best on this incredible initiative. It's important, and we need more of this.
Yes. Thank you, Tyrell.
Bye.
Bye.